Okay, it's a good morning from me here in the UK. Obviously, in parts of the world, it may be afternoon, it may be evening, it may be middle of the night. So, carrying on from the last video that I did in regards to the Alexander Mitrovic situation, in regards to the FA appealing against his 8 game suspension. As I said, Di Canio and Prutton are the examples used for lengthier suspensions, similar to what Mitrovic did. Di Canio got 11 games, Prutton got 10 games. The FA is not happy with the punishment that has been given, and I described how the punishment was broken down into 3 matches for the straight red, 3 matches for violent conduct, and 2 matches for abusive language towards the official. Um, so it sort of works out that way. The FA wants that suspension to be longer, so we'll see what happens there. That's the major big sports news, basically making the airwaves this morning in England, at least, or in the UK at least. The WWE and UFC have decided to merge together as well, so that's going to be interesting as well. What do I think about Unai Emery's Aston Villa? Oh, I think the way it ended for him at Arsenal was a bit of a damp squib. Didn't end very well. But I think Villa are decent. They're solid. They're better than what they were under Gerrard. I think there's been an improvement with Aston Villa under Unai Emery. At the moment, though, they are a solid mid-table side. We'll have to see what they do in the summer and what progression they can make with their squad going forward. They're just not quite where the Villa teams of old were at. Very successful club historically. Um, Massive fan base in the West Midlands. The most successful club from the West Midlands. Founders of the Football League, very historical club. And if it's, but where they are right now, I think mid-table is about fair. I think their position is about right. I think the Gerrard experiment didn't work out in the end. But Unai Emery's time at Arsenal didn't work out in the end. So I think they're a good marriage together. I think it's the right manager, right club mix at Villa. But I think Villa, with the fan base they have and the success they've had historically, should be doing better in the future. They can't continue to tread water mid-table because other clubs that have been in that mid-table region have really kicked on, and other clubs such as your Brentfords and your Brightons are doing far better than what people expected at the beginning of the season. And when Graham Potter left Brighton, for example, people thought, "Oh Christ, Brighton, they're done," and they're in an FA Cup semi-final. And I honestly believe they could be a very dark horse if you are a betting man or woman to make. They not only make the FA Cup final, but win it. I think Brighton have kicked on from where Graham Potter left them with that solid foundation and have taken that next step. Brentford, under Thomas Frank, obviously the Tony situation and how long his suspension is going to be for his betting breaches is going to be interesting. But Brentford have kicked on. People thought they might be like a Huddersfield one hit and then done, and that they're doing really well, surprising people. But the fact that like we've seen over half the league change manager and Chelsea have changed manager twice is quite stunning. And of course, Reading down in the Championship now have officially been hit with their 6 point deductions. So that sort of sets a precedent for what could happen to Everton in their situation, in their battle to avoid relegation. Um, Leicester with Brendan Rodgers, I think they've left that too late personally. But so there's a lot going on in English football. A lot going on. It's the business end of the season, and managers are still getting sacked. I can see some more managers losing their jobs in the summer as well. I can see this not being over for this crop of managers. I think some more managers will be moving on. I am surprised Roy Hodgson's gone back to Crystal Palace, and I am surprised they sacked Patrick Vieira. But it is what it is. But there we go. I mean, it's 11 man just sacked in one season more than another. I mean, it's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. I think we need to look at. I think football as a sport needs to look at the rate of managerial sackings now. It's not just the Premier League; it's all leagues across Europe. I think UEFA needs to look at this and maybe they need to bring a rule in where the manager's got to be there for at least a season. Um, I mean, Brendan Rodgers, he had been at Leicester for a while, and yes, there's been some success there, but obviously things have tailed off, and I think that one's a more justifiable sacking. But Graham Potter was only given 7 months. I mean, that is ridiculous. Not quite on the levels of Brian Clough at Leeds United back in the 70s of 44 days, but on that level of ridiculousness. Quite honestly, if we're being brutally honest, I think more managers will lose their jobs. Um, we've seen some. I mean, Ralph Husnart, it wasn't that long ago. He signed a 5-year extension to Southampton, and the wheels have come off. I think Jurgen Klopp is actually under a lot of pressure. If results don't turn around and they continue to be mediocre, I think he might be gone before the end of next season. They need to do a lot in the transfer window. So we'll see. But it is ridiculous. I mean, I've not seen a season like it with so many managerial changes. But Chelsea have done it twice now. Um, and then you look at the Championship and some of the managerial turnaround in the Championship. That's ridiculous as well. I mean, Toure lasted 7 games at Wigan, for example. There has to be some kind of rule change brought in. We need to look at this as a much. Oh, it's bloody cold. It's not going on. As a much wider situation, as a much wider issue. In my opinion, I do think it needs to be looked at. I think we need to have a discussion about it. I don't think we're trending in the right direction, but in modern sport now, modern sports coaching, modern sports management, you are hired to be fired. That is a staying. I mean, Brian Burke, who's an NHL figure, used to be a general manager of I think Calgary and Vancouver. He basically says you are hired to be fired. A general manager should only ever have to sack one coach and hire one coach. And if you're sacking your second coach, you're out of a job. That's basically his mantra. If you've gone through more than 2 coaches, you yourself as general manager should be sacked. So directors of football in this case, if we're talking about footballing uh, parallel. But yeah, it's not a good look. I mean, it is worrying the trend that we're following. And this is not a new trend. This has been gathering momentum for quite a few years now. The managerial turnover is ridiculous, um, and you can see why some ex players don't want to get into management. There's no job security. I think the Premier League, there is so much money on the line. I think teams panic off of it. I mean, I think it's a bit more than that. I think yes, money, too much money in the game has got something to do with it. There is far too much money in the game. I think that does have a bearing. I do agree. In saying that, it is starting to get to the point now where it is becoming ridiculous. It's the same across all European leagues. The managerial turnover is, and some of the short stints of managers is just bizarre, absolutely bizarre. Um, and I use clubs like Chelsea and Watford as examples of ridiculous managerial turnover, and and then you can see why a lot of ex-players leave the game entirely and don't want to get into coaching. There is not enough job security. If you're talking about a couple of years average, we've gone from 2 3 years average to a lot less. Now Jurgen Klopp is the longest serving manager currently at a club. He's been at Liverpool now for 8 years. He's the longest serving manager. Obviously, he was the second longest after Eddie Howe. But when Eddie Howe got sacked by Bournemouth, he became the longest serving. That tells you all you need to know. Now, Liverpool have had a fair bit of silverware under Jurgen Klopp. Um, Pep Guardiola, I think, is the second longest serving manager currently at a club in the Premier League. I think Thomas Frank as well has been at Brentford for quite some time, but has only had 2 seasons in the Premier League. But it is starting to get a bit worrying, the trend that we're seeing. And a lot of these owners have this win now, we must win our mentality, and you can only win X amount of trophies. If you are a Premier League club, Europe notwithstanding, you can only win the Premier League, the League Cup, and the FA Cup. If you are lucky enough to be in one of the European competitions, you could be possibly going for 4 competitions. But in reality, the majority of clubs are in the hunt for 3. And out of that, you could argue maybe 4 or 5 could win a trophy. So it's a very limited pool of clubs that are going to come. One team could sweep all, which has never happened before, but one team in theory could sweep the whole lot. So the success is held by a few clubs. But then you look at clubs like Tottenham, like Chelsea, like Watford. There is no managerial stability. There hasn't been for quite some time. I mean, Tottenham have gone for a manager a season over the last 4 years. Chelsea just hire and fire like it's going out of fashion. And Watford, how many managers have they had now? It's getting kind of ridiculous. Do I think Nottingham Forest should stick with Steve Cooper? I think Nottingham Forest's problem is the amount of new signings they've made and having a squad that can gel together. They basically just replaced their entire squad in 12 months. Player turnover at Forest is ridiculous. So you can't build a nucleus of a team. And a fair bit of that has to lie with Steve Cooper, but a fair bit has to lie with the ownership. It's their first season back in the top flight. If they stay up or go down is up for debate. But it's their first season back in the Premier League since 1998. It's been a long time since the club's been in the top flight. Historical club success, obviously historically. Um, I think I think the Brentford model is the best model for a promoted club to gain stability, in my personal opinion, that I've ever seen. And they're doing exactly the opposite, where they've just completely gone. Well, this is the team that got us to this level. Let's completely change it, which I thought was ridiculous. Um, they've had some good results this season. They've had some bad results this season. But where they were when he took over, they were facing relegation from the Championship. So the turnaround under Steve Cooper has been fantastic. When he was appointed, the Premier League was the last thing on a lot of fans' minds. It was coming to stay in this division. Um, but the problem is the amount of player turnover. I think is the issue for Nottingham Forest. It's not that they're a Premier League club or a Championship club or whatever. The amount of turnover is ridiculous. Um, and the amount of spending they've done as well. If we're talking about Everton and Man City and their financial fair play, possibly Chelsea, clubs like Nottingham Forest need to be looked at as well because that is a ridiculous amount of player turnover. Ridiculous. But if they stay up, then yes, I think they should stick with him. But they need to build a nucleus of a team around players already there rather than continually changing the squad around. That was insane. They obviously overachieved last season, and they were scared about going straight back down and having an embarrassing season like a Derby County 11-point season. Um, but they completely that was a scattergun transfer policy. I just don't understand that. That's probably going to harm them. Gotta have a cup of tea. Oh, I love a cup of tea. But look, I think the fact they haven't sacked Steve Cooper at this point, and they've stuck with him in their first season back, is important. But I do think the amount, as I say, the player turnover is the problem at Forest. I think they're in a dogfight. It's a very congested bottom half of the table, and it's going to go down to the last day of the season. I have no doubt. The Everton situation, I think, is the red herring, the elephant in the room. What punishment will Everton receive for their financial fair play breaches that they've been found guilty of, posting 5 years consecutive losses? Um, that's going to be interesting. What punishment gets dished out to them? The Premier League is very adverse to giving points deductions, very, very anti points deductions. But other leagues, yeah, punish them. So we shall see what happens in regards to the Everton situation because that I think will have a massive bearing on the outcome of the final league table. If they don't get a points deduction this season and they start next season with a points deduction, I can see legal challenges from clubs. And that becomes a bigger mess that I think the Premier League would like to avoid. Um, then you've got the ongoing Man City investigation, which, to be honest, we knew was going to happen at some point. UEFA have been sniffing around Man City for the best part of a decade. In reality, this isn't something that's just happened overnight. Um, and the club and the fans have got a chip on their shoulder about it. I'm sorry, but regardless who your owners are, if you don't abide by the rules, you deserve to be punished. Now, UEFA screwed up with their limitations on their punishment. Yeah, I think that Dyche should have been, installed at the start of the season. I think Lampard, while he kept them up last season, Dyche was available. Get Lampard out, get Dyche in. I think they would be much higher up the table and they wouldn't be in this relegation fight. But now you know what's going on behind the scenes off the field in regards to a potential what their potential punishment could be in regards to their financial breaches, and it doesn't matter what manager you got at that point, um, because they could be, relegated out of the league anyway. Um, but again, the attitude. I mean, there are several clubs where you could definitely argue they've got a toxic dressing room culture, and they've got a toxic culture anyway. Chelsea is one, Everton's another, Spurs. There are several clubs that you could argue the attitude isn't right, the culture isn't right, and that stems from ownership. That stems from the top all the way down. Um, that's my personal opinion. Attitude stems from the public face of the club, which is the owners, the board, backroom staff, all the way down to tea lady at the training ground. Everton is one of those clubs that seems to be toxic, and they've also had a lot of managers since David Moyes left. You can see the change in clubs like Newcastle, which now have a positive atmosphere. And there's talk about this LIV golf legal case, and what that could mean for clubs like Newcastle and Manchester City with their Arab owners. Um, and the debate about new ownership rules that the Premier League are to bring in regards to potential takeovers from people who've got links to human rights abuses. So the Man United situation, which has got a bit quiet the last couple of days. It's got a bit quiet on the Manchester United front, and we'll have to see if the Glazers are united in their intent to sell. But Manchester United, I didn't stir my sugar over on that. Ugh. Manchester United situation has gone a bit quiet, all quiet on the Western Front there, and there's a big debate about the potential Qatari bid, and to Jim Ratcliffe's bid with his conflict of interest with a couple of clubs he owns in France and Switzerland. But at least in Jim Ratcliffe's case, he's got club ownership knowledge. He knows what running a sports team is all about. Um, so there's various things on the table, but you know, in my opinion, club ownership is a mess, and club finances are a mess. And this is not just an English Premier League and English Football League problem. This is a much wider issue that UEFA need to look at. And then we've got the Barcelona situation with what they're accused of in regards to potentially, this is the accusation, is that they've been, over a significant period of time, they have been attempting to bribe or have bribed league officials in Spain and refereeing officials. And for me, the more we learn about Barcelona over the last, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years, it does make a lot of sense now. Yes, they have had some great players and fantastic facilities and great youth system, but the culture within that organisation and the attitude within that organisation and the sheer arrogance of that organisation is coming home to roost. And now we're finding out about all these dodgy deals that have been going on in regards to Barcelona for the best part of 20 years. Um, and Real Madrid is always toxic, and then you've got Juventus with their creative accounting. It's just a mess. Pretty safe to say Southampton are getting relegated. Nothing's set in stone yet. Nothing's set in stone yet. I think there's a few more twists and turns to play out before the end of the season. Yes, the Basingstoke Bison situation. Look, in the ice hockey, having been to that ice rink in that arena, I'm surprised even now they're still allowed to play games there with the Buffalo for next season. Back in 2018, I was working as a farm labourer, and my manager, the guy in charge of my little department on the farm, his partner was playing for the women's team at Basingstoke. Now, they had a meeting back in 2018 to discuss their potential future. That's 5 years ago, this time 5 years ago. And they were basically told, we can't guarantee that the roof won't fall on your head. So they merged with the women's team merged with Swindon and Bracknell at the time. So there's been ongoing issues with the facility in Basingstoke for quite some time. And it, it, yeah, I mean, it's just the Bracknell Bees are obviously now playing in Slough. There's no spare rinks around for Basingstoke to play in, and that means there's a lot of available players now to be signed. So it is a massive shame for the game. But we lurch from one crisis in British ice hockey to the next. Um, we've got arena issues. We've got funding issues for a variety of teams historically. Some teams really are struggling to exist. Um, Telford Tigers at one point mothballed for a year or two. Hull have constantly had issues since the Stingrays days, and facilities is a major part of that. Sporting infrastructure is a major part of that, and the sport in this country has grown massively. And now we're seeing the elite league wanting to change the import rule and actually increase the number of imports and reduce the number of homegrown players. That that really is an insult to all those young up and coming players who play in the National League that we have all seen play over many years, getting their chance at the top level to possibly do a Liam Kirk and get drafted by the NHL. Um, what are my thoughts on Chelsea finally sacking Potter? Look, Todd Bowley, the relationship. I mean, look, he sacked Tuchel, but Tuchel has a very short shelf life, and I think Bayern Munich fans are going to find that out as well. He's going to fall out with directors of football and presidents like Beckenbauer. Tuchel is a prickly character. I'm not surprised Tuchel was sacked, although I thought Tuchel would see out this first season with Todd Bowley in charge. That wasn't the case. He did about 100 or so days. Potter did about 7 months. Sometimes it's wrong manager, wrong club, and I always go back to the Brian Clough Leeds United experiment in the 70s where he lasted 44 days. Won the league with Derby, goes on to win success with Nottingham Forest, 44 days at Leeds. Um, and yeah, it is a situation where Brighton have improved since he's left, but he's not a bad manager. This is the thing; he's not a bad manager, but Chelsea, and I don't know how much control he has over transfers because that some of the transfer policy at Chelsea makes no sense. In fact, none of it makes any sense. They're literally, instead of buying the best player for the position you need, so that might mean spending a bit less than the super. They're just throwing money around, going, we'll just get anyone, and that is not a way to build a team. Um, Funny, I mentioned the roof. Sheffield tweeted out one of the periods. Can't remember what they had to stop yet. Well, the building, I mean, have you seen the boards and the ice surface? I mean, I used to work with a lad who's a goalkeeper with the Windsor and Slough Knights, which are a rec team, but they obviously train around all the Berkshire rink. Now Bracknell's rink's gone as well. When Slough was being redeveloped, they did a lot of training at what was the Bracknell rink, and they also played games at Basingstoke rink. And he went, if you're going down with your blocker and stick to block a shot, you lose your balance because the ice surface is uneven. The boards are all over the place. The plexiglass is not a consecutive protective barrier. I've seen pucks go through gaps in the plexiglass. The the state of the facility has been in a poor state of repair for 7, 8 years. This has not happened over COVID. This has not happened just since COVID. This has happened over a significant period of time where Planet Ice, who were the former operators, really did not maintain their facility properly. Now, someone else has now come on and Planet Ice went, oh, we don't want this anymore. We don't want anything to do with it. But the fact that, yeah, parts of the building were falling on the ice surface is a sign that I don't think Basingstoke are going back there. Now, we don't know what the future is in redevelopment of the site and getting a new facility. There's been a lot of battles with the local government about that. So similar battles that were had in Bracknell in regards to the COVID pandemic and the state Bracknell facility. Again, ownership at that time, cutting corners in regards to maintenance and not investing in the facility that was there. Many times the air conditioning or the climate control would fail. That regularly happened at Basingstoke, and that caused structural. There's loads of structural problems with the building. I mean, I remember going there. back in 2017 for my birthday with a couple of friends. My birthday's in the middle of December. It was warmer outside in the middle of winter than inside the facility, and it was bloody freezing outside. So you can just imagine how cold it was inside that facility. That there was damage basically it needs to be knocked down. It should have been um, sorted out years ago. Um, there was a lot of issues with moisture in the building, weak concrete, poor foundations, and the general state. There were issues raised back in the mid 2000s about the facility. That's how far back the issues with the Basingstoke Planet Ice Arena go. But it's about nearly 20 years. Nearly 20 years ago, concerns were being raised. About 18 years ago, concerns were being raised by structural engineers then. Um, but the fact that an opposition team were like, "Oh, play's been suspended, guys, because parts of the roof have fallen in." That is worrying for an indoor arena that it's falling apart around you, and they are still allowed to play there for the rest of like the playoffs and the rest of this. It's ridiculous, ridiculous. They shouldn't be. Um, and it is shambolic that obviously that is the case. The fact that they're going to not be here next year is a shame. I think it is a great shame that they're not going to be part of the league structure for a year. Some great players played for the Basingstoke Bison, formerly the Beavers. Obviously, all the sex jokes there. Beavers got stuff last night for them. Um, but a lot of players who've gone on to the Elite League or played in Europe, and some North American players who played in the AHL have played for Basingstoke. So it's not as if they haven't developed players and had a very solid foundation in the community. But concerns have been, the uncertainty around the facility's been there for about 7 years now, and it is concerning. So we'll see what happens. Apparently, West Ham are looking, but yes, David Moyes is under pressure at West Ham. Again, another club having a down season. A lot of clubs are having a down season. Chelsea should go for Vlahovic or Oishman. Oishman and Karavac. Where they go. Napoli have a real chance to win the Champions League. Napoli are on course for their first league title in nearly 30 years. Also, yeah, I mean, it would be great to see a new name on the Champions League trophy, and that's really two. And if that happens, that's a real great two fingers to the European Super League idea. Um, be fantastic, uh, fantastic to have Napoli or another new team at some point win the Champions League and just give the two fingers to the European Super League. The West Tigers are the worst run club in the NRL. Not on profits, not for finances anymore. They're doing really well on bringing the money in, but in structuring a team to actually compete on the field, they are terrible. So I don't think Tim Sheens and Benji Marshall are. Well, Benji Marshall, we don't know what he was going to be like as a head coach, but Tim Sheens is, from my opinion, no. There's a reason why he left. So, yes, he's the last coach to take them to finals football, but into the top eight. But that was a long time. That was a decade ago. And the game has evolved since Sheen was last coaching in the NRL. Even when he was over here in the Super League as in the consultancy role, the game was evolving, and I think maybe it's time for Sheens to call it a day. Benji Marshall, he only recently retired, so he's seen the changes that the game has gone through. He's obviously, I would say, was one of those players that had to adapt to the six again rule and the more open style of play, the faster speed of the game. We'll have to see if they do stick with Tim Sheens for a couple of years and then go with the Benji Marshall experiment, because, in my opinion, they do risk. And I know teams like the Raiders are having a down season and Parramatta haven't started well and look a bit vulnerable, and there's some other teams that have had slow starts or iffy starts. But they risk being cut adrift very early on, because all it takes is the Raiders and Parramatta to win a couple of games, it's uh, you know. But there is that risk with the Tigers. If they lose to Parramatta, then they're in trouble. And if the Raiders start picking up some wins and Parramatta, for example, start picking up, which they will, West Tigers are in the ship. There is no other way to look at it. If they don't win 2 out of their next 3, they are going to be cut adrift at the bottom, and it's going to be a very, very long season. Like Western Suburb Magpies bad, like in 1999, or Newcastle Knights bad in like 2015, 2016 when they were shocking. We could see back-to-back wooden spoons. Am I ever planning on growing my hair again? Well, this is like a couple of months worth of growth. Um, um, I grew. Obviously, I've just shaved my beard off. I've been growing that for a little while. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, it was down to about here, so it did get a bit long. That's the longest I've had it since I was like 3 years old. I don't know. Maybe. But at the moment, I'm more focused on getting content up, and obviously I've got a week off work, but I'm more focused on the channel at the moment, and my other job, and just the day to day grind with life. I'm not really concerned much about how long my hair is or how short it is or whether I have a beard or not have a beard at the moment. We're in the first week of April, uh, but yeah, 3-4 months worth of growth there on my head. My hair grows quite quick, so you might have some wild hair come the end of the year. It might start growing back, but that was 2.5 years worth of growing. I mean, that was me not cutting my hair for 2.5 years. Maybe. Um, Most other clubs only have one win. The Tigers aren't as terrible as people. I no, watching that Brisbane game and how they quit. No, they have a lot of issues, and their attack. I actually broke it down on how many points they're scoring and how many they're conceding. They've broken the 12-point barrier once. Um, they average just over 13 points a game because they broke that 12-point barrier. They've scored 12 points 3 times. They have conceded double the amount of points that they've scored, and they've changed the spine multiple times. They've changed the starting hooker multiple times. They've changed the fullback. They've changed his half partner. Luke Brooks, I don't think is the whole situation there. The reason why the Knights didn't pick up Luke Brooks is they were not happy that the West Tigers didn't want to retain as much salary as they wanted. They weren't happy to take his full whacking salary on, plus the contract kicking in. Luke Brooks is the most overpaid, overhyped player I've ever seen. He's only had one good season, really. Can't control a team, can't create. Um, Multiple halves partners. They've tried with so many different players alongside him. He may never play finals football, which will be hilarious because they continually are going with this Luke Brooks. He's going to be the next great. He's 27. He's nearly 28. He's been playing in the NRL now for a decade. If they're continuing with the Luke Brooks experiment and it's not working, repeating the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome is the sign of fucking madness. Doesn't matter who the coach is. They've tried everything with Luke Brooks. He really is appalling. I just say drop him to reserve grade. Put someone else in there. It's that bad. Cruz leaving over the Titans. Not much. Not many thoughts on that really. Um, Not unless they do a Canterbury. Look, the Bulldogs always had a bit of fight in them. But even when they were, I mean, this season they're looking completely different. But in the last few seasons where they've been at the bottom, they've never given up in games. They've been battered in games, but you can see that the fight and the togetherness within the team is there. Um, so, yeah, I don't think the West Tigers even have that tail end to a season. I think they are going to be cut adrift, and we're already in the first week of April talking about wooden spoon. If they don't beat Parramatta, their season's done. That's a winnable game. Parramatta are vulnerable. They've had a poor start to the season themselves. They've got a few players missing with injury, players missing with suspension. They're vulnerable. I can't see the West Tigers beat Parramatta because Parramatta, the games they've lost have all been close games. It's been and West Tigers can't score many points. So as long as Parramatta defend well, I think they can easily outscore them. Luke Brooks does hold the record. I think he broke that record when they hit I think 2 seasons ago. I think he broke Michael Bolt, Cameron Blair, and they weren't bad players, by the way. They just played on bad teams. He's already overtaken that record. Every game now that he goes without playing finals, every game that gets added, he breaks his own record for mediocrity. He's not a bad player, but he's not the guy you want to be leading your team around. He needs someone next to him. When he had that one season with Benji Marshall, he was fantastic because he didn't have to think; he just had to do. Um, um, yeah, but Mark O'Neill, I mean, he played finals. There's your difference. He managed to get into the latter stages of the season. Luke Brooks could play his entire career without playing any postseason matches, and that is just ridiculous. That should not be happening. With a salary cap in place, and this is a league with no relegation, with a salary cap in place, that should not be a thing. Um, yeah, Chris Sandow, he was a bit of a hit and miss player, but no, he's passed these guys long ago. This is starting to get to a point where when we're discussing the 18th team, I mean, look at the Dolphins weren't meant to be this good to start the season. Yeah, they've lost a couple now, but they had a fantastic start. This West Tigers side, yeah, look, Michael Maguire was a brilliant coach. Ivan Cleary's they couldn't get this side to win, and they've proven themselves with other teams. So this really does tell you the situation within that organisation where losing has become part of the identity. But it doesn't help as well. I think they've only ever had 4 seasons where they've made finals football, and the two previous clubs were both bankrupt. Western Suburbs, Christ, the season before West Tigers become a thing, um, Western Suburb Magpies had two back-to-back wooden spoon seasons that were record-breakingly bad. Like, so that the origin story of this team was, well, Balmain have got no money, Western Suburbs have got no money. Oh, and also their continual wooden spoon. Yeah. Oh, and yes, they might actually go further down the ladder. Yes, but we will see what happens. Pascoe has been heavily criticised by many, um, and it's it's not often, obviously, that we discuss the NRL on a live stream at this time of day because obviously Australia's middle of the night. But I do have to admit, uh, I do have to admit, the West Tigers is a basket case for a club. Dual venture clubs don't tend to work. Look what happened with the Northern Bears and the Manly Sea Eagles, the Northern Eagles. That didn't last very long. St George Illawarra, they're a mess as well. Um, they're a dysfunctional club, and they've been a dysfunctional club for quite some time. Dual venture clubs don't work. Um, it's a flawed idea, um, and I've never been a fan of the dual venture model. It doesn't work, in my opinion. Oh, look, yeah, they have been more successful, but both clubs, since they've been dual venture clubs, have only ever won one premiership each, and that tells you all you need to know about dual venture clubs. They're not overly successful. Uh, and then you look at the culture of St George Illawarra, the amount of players misbehaving every bloody season, and the culture within that dressing room, and some of the scandals that have surrounded the Dragons. Um, it does raise concerns about the culture within that organisation. And yes, they might have made two grand finals, won one. They might have won two minor premierships, but that was a long time ago. It hasn't been in recent years that they've been successful. And I do keep harking back to the culture within the club hierarchy and the club itself. Um, but no, the West Tigers are a mess. Are a mess. Um, and there are many reasons why they're in the situation they are, and they keep coming back to the team they could have had, the players they've let go, the youth talent that's been in their system that's moved on and had more success or won elsewhere or had a better NRL career, being like a first team regular or winning international caps, Origin. God, this cough can fuck off. And the West Tigers, I mean, you look at it, active players right now that have been in their organisation who are now at other teams, who have had success, who have played in grand finals, who have played Origin, who are, first team regulars. It is ridiculous the amount of players that could be on that list. The thing about the joint venture is St George only really did the wider junior base and access to the Illawarra region. Financially, at the time, they were fine, and whereas they were, they were. The Illawarra Steelers were not as a powerful, as a potent club, but were pretty decent as well. And this is a legacy of the Super League war and the financial constraints placed upon the sport in the late 90s, early 2000s. Oh, fuck, Strepsils. They've actually proven there's been a recall of Strepsils over health concerns, ironically. Um, but no, the joint venture model, the NRL basically at the start in 1998, you had, was it? Yeah, it was 20 clubs, and they were told to shrink, which is why, for example, South Sydney were kicked out of the competition. And obviously they came back, but they were told to consolidate and shrink the league down. Now, the problem with that is now we're expanding again. So basically the TV company wasn't willing to spend the money for the TV rights. But no, it is interesting, and obviously, like we're now talking about expansion. Where's this 18th team going to go? Can the game manage 18 teams? Will there be enough? We had 20 teams at one point, so and we had two separate leagues at one point competing against each other. So I think there's enough talent out there and enough fans out there to support 18 teams. Where the NRL goes is going to be interesting. Where the NHL, that's a different league and a different continent, different sport. No, but where the NRL goes next is going to be a debating point. Do they stay on the East Coast? Do they play it safe with another team in Queensland or New South Wales? Or do they be brave and go to Perth, go to Adelaide, go to South Island, New Zealand, another team in Victoria? There's a lot of unknowns in regards to uh, you know where the next team goes. In regards to the Balmain West Tigers and St George and the Illawarra mergers, and the fact that they were given special incentives to do so and were basically encouraged to do so by the Australian Rugby League Commission and NRL headquarters, I think the dual venture nature of those clubs is a mistake. I think, and in West Tigers' case, it's never worked. I wouldn't say not everyone supports the Warriors. I think you could build a market in the South Island or in Wellington. I think you could. I think it would massively improve the player base and the competitive nature of things. I know the Warriors are having a very, very good season so far, and got a rugby mad nation either coast. So you've already got that potential player pool. So yeah, we'll see what happens in regards to where the 18th team gets placed. Yeah, Penrith have had money issues on and off for years. Yes, they've been successful on the field in recent seasons, but when COVID hit, there were concerns that Penrith would go out of business. Literally at the start of the 2020 season, when COVID shut the league down, Penrith were concerned about going financially bust. And obviously their recent successes has definitely helped. Definitely helped financially. But we'll see. No, Darwin really the smallest capital. Darwin doesn't have that. While the games on the road in Darwin, mate, get good crowds. think of the infrastructure and how isolated Darwin is and how bloody hot it is. It's in the tropics. Like you would have to play every game at night, and of course it's in the central Australian time zone. That's ridiculous. I would say Perth is a better option. I mean, and Aussie rules is more popular in the Northern Territory than rugby league as well. So the AFL does actually have its tentacles already in Darwin. Um, and is there? I mean, would there be enough rugby league fans in the Northern Territory to support and sustain an NRL franchise? Is there enough corporate money in the NT to do it? Um, oh God, this cold. Uh, so there you go. I don't support I don't support the Warriors as a Parramatta fan. It'd be very bad if they won a premiership before us. Kill the memes, jokes, and thanks. Parramatta get offered 500,000, take one go to Darwin a year. They usually get 8 to 10,000 for the game. And the TIA stadium is not the NRL standard, I think. Look, the AFL goes to Darwin as well. The Northern Territory Football League, which is Aussie rules, is quite strong. So I don't see the NRL going to Darwin. I don't I don't see. There we go. Get rid of that snot bugger. I don't see the NRL going to Darwin on a permanent basis. There's not enough corporate money there. The population catchment is too small. Um, Ratings. I mean, who's that TV viewership? Who's that fans in attendance when games are taken there? Because you've got to remember, Darwin gets hot and time zone differential and all sorts and travel. But I would think Perth or Adelaide would be a far better bet for the NRL to try and get their, you know, dive into and cross the Barassi line. Or do they play safe and stay on the east coast in a very congested sports market in Australia? You've got two big urban areas where the NRL does not have an imprint in Adelaide and Perth. They've been there before. Um, so yeah, not many. Yeah, I am surprised that the state of Victoria hasn't, with the Melbourne Storm being so successful and that imprint being there since 1999, haven't the state league hasn't grown, participation hasn't grown, and the amount of players going on to the NRL first grade from Victoria hasn't kicked on. I think that's a failing of the NRL since they've been in Melbourne. They've been in Melbourne 4 times, even with all the success Melbourne have had, they haven't broken into the market there. When you go there, it's just AFL, AFL, and football and cricket. Um, Again, that's how you market the product. That's how you um, sell yourself. But I think the players who play for the Melbourne Storm probably like the fact that it's an AFL city because they can just go about their business when they're not training or playing and go around incognito and not worry about getting noticed in the street by fans. It's the same thing over in North America when NHL players sign for teams like the Florida Panthers or the Arizona Coyotes. They feel more relaxed with their families. Um, they 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 feel more at ease, and they can just go about their daily business without people noticing who they are. The MLS, that's starting to change with football players or soccer players, depending on where you are in the world, in regards to since the David Beckham LA Galaxy moment. Um, they are getting more noticed in the street now, the overseas players. There's more media coverage, there's more press coverage. The league has grown massively. So it was desirable to finish your career in the MLS and go about, quietly. But obviously, with the growth of social media and the internet, and yeah, it's an interesting one. Again, 2016 till now, that's a big difference. A lot has changed in 7 years. I would have thought. A lot has changed in like 6 7 years. And yeah, look, they lost in the grand final to Cronulla that year. But no, as I say, it's how you market your brand to. I mean, there's about 5 million people in the Melbourne area, and then you've got Geelong across the bay. The Melbourne metropolitan area is big. It's not small. Um, It's a very big market, and yes, there's a lot of AFL. You know, there's a lot of AFL, and the way the AFL has definitely marketed themselves, not only in the state of Victoria but across Australia, I think is better than the NRL. I think they do a much better job, um, and it really is a battle for the Australian dollar domestically between the two leagues and the domestic viewership on TV and the sponsorship and ultimately the athlete player base. And I don't think the NRL is doing a very good job in Melbourne, even with a successful team that is consistently one of the top 4 or 5 every season, makes grand finals, wins grand finals, breaks records, has record breaking players. Some of the best players of all time have played for the club. Fantastic facility that they play in at Amy Park. I am surprised that they don't have a bigger imprint. But again, 2016 is a long time ago. A lot has changed. Obviously, winning the 2020 grand final might have gone some way to change that in regards to the COVID pandemic year. Um, but I am surprised that the NRL made the Melbourne Storm better. Put those grassroots investment in the grassroots and the state league there. I think that's a massive failing on the NRL and Australia Rugby League's part. And we talk about the NRL being the better league to grow the game globally over the Super League, and I do agree with that statement. I think the Rugby Football League over here, the RFL over here, have made a right ham-fisted attempt to promoting and growing the game to a new audience and to new fans and expanding the game both domestically in the UK and to a certain extent France, but also the Canadian experiment, which raised some eyebrows when Toronto were accepted, and it was then shown within a few years this is a financial disaster. This is not going to work. Um, so it, we can debate about facts and figures and say our participation levels, fans, this or that, but it's all about the infrastructure and having the commercial sponsorships and potential ownership there. And also, we've got to bear in mind the Northern Territory in Darwin isn't the wealthiest city either. There's a lot of deprivation in the Northern Territory. There's less disposable income in Darwin and the Northern Territory. It's more isolated than other urban areas. And there's been no interest to put a team there before. Why should they put a team there now? Perth and Adelaide are far more likely. Um, Far more likely. Yeah, I don't really do Super League videos. I mean, I do more sort of NRL content. Obviously, Challenge Cup games when they're on, I might do a match review, but they don't really get the viewership either. And obviously, we're both based in the UK. Obviously, you're based up north. I'm based down here. Um, but my NRL content, some of it's going rather well. Um, and see, I don't watch the Super League. I watch the Challenge Cup and I watch the internationals when we play. But no, the Super League, the quality of rugby league at a domestic level, the NRL is far superior, far superior. Um, and it tells you all you need to know. The best players play in the NRL. The, the the North American market's buying into the NRL as well. The NRL wants to take games to the US. Not hearing about Super League wanting to take games to Canada and the US and sell the game over there. Um, but the NRL, more money, higher salary cap, better players, higher quality of play. Um, the game is faster. Uh, the skill level, I think, in my opinion, is higher. The fitness levels are better, and it's borne out. Okay, yes, Penrith have never won a World Club Challenge, which I find really odd considering they've won 4 grand finals, but they've never managed to win the World Club Challenge. However, saying that, how many times have Super League clubs won the World Club Challenge? It's not many. And this St Helens side, I think, is one of the best sides that the UK's ever produced. But if they were to repeat that again, highly unlikely. If you were to play each other 10 times, I think Penrith wins 7. That's my opinion on that. Get a Welsh and Scottish team in the Super League. We've tried that with the Welsh, didn't work. They were crap. And Scottish team, good luck. Good luck. Western Sydney area, Penrith, Parramatta, Campbelltown are known as poor areas. Parramatta's gained wealth. Is classed as the secondary CBD now in the Greater Sydney metropolitan area. But no, Penrith definitely much poorer. But Greater Western Sydney is not the wealthiest. A lot of crime, a lot of deprivation, lower wages. Yeah, it's not known as. It is true. They are. Super League, yeah, they did. I've done a video on the history of rugby league in the US. I've done a history of rugby league in Canada. They did take a game to Milwaukee, I believe, quite some time ago. Didn't get a great crowd. Did not get a great crowd. Was it in the late 90s, I believe? Parramatta isn't a poor area. I've never known it to be poor. Penrith and Toronto, yes. Campbelltown's around yes. Um, Parramatta, in comparison to other areas in New South Wales, is. In other areas in Western Sydney, isn't. Wales used to be a rugby league powerhouse only because they nicked some of the best players from Union in the 80s. And they weren't a powerhouse. Let's be clear on that. They just decided the RFL were a bit cheeky in the 80s, and players like Jonathan Davis and the Welsh Rebels came over and they nicked a few for a little bit. That's it. The reason why rugby union went professional was in part because of rugby league nicking players like the Welsh Rebels, like Jonathan Davis, who I find a really annoying person right now. He's the most annoying pundit and commentator. He's got the squeakiest little voice. He claims to have all this knowledge on the game. Coach it then. If I had to choose between living in Parramatta, Penrith, or Campbelltown, I'd be choosing Parramatta. No bars. I've been to all three, but Parramatta's the best at. If I had the choice, I wouldn't live in Sydney. It's too expensive. And I want to go to Australia to live and work, and I would not choose anywhere in Greater Sydney or Melbourne to live. It's just too expensive. Wales is the only country besides Australia, England, New Zealand, France. Scotland does as well, a couple, but I think Ireland had one or two back in the day. But no, there is an issue with nationality and players switching nationality in rugby league, and the international game not being as of the same standard as rugby union. I think that's where rugby union's won the battle on the international game and the participation levels. But no, the rugby league, especially in Australia, the club game is good. The quality of play is good. Harvey Spears' contract is too lucrative and easy. Why would he go? As far as I'm aware, Jonathan Davis has never coached ever. I've always wanted rugby league to have the same rules as FIFA. You pick a country and that's it. No country shopping or country hopping. Andrew Peter made a mockery of it. A few players have. A few players have chopped and changed their allegiance to suit. And now that it brings into question state of origin, and I look in the IRL, the International Rugby League does not have the money to really have the same impact as World Rugby. Basically broke. It's relied on the NRL and Super League to really drive the game, and there's not enough professional leagues out there. Yeah, Tedesco. Yep, Tedesco's one. Technically, Mitch Moses is eligible for Australia because he's played Origin and he's at Wales. So yeah, there is definitely a debate to be had in regards to players switching allegiance quite regularly, which is a problem, and I think it weakens the international game. It does. It has to. But they keep international selection rules have been questioned in a lot of sports for quite some time. This is not just a rugby league issue. Rugby union and cricket are facing it. Football's facing it. Um, multiple sports face this issue in regards to international selection and player availability, or athletes choosing to represent the country. It is not unique to one sport. It is a international sporting issue, and with the increased globalization of sport that we've seen in the last 20, 30 years, it's becoming more of an issue as time goes on. Um, Yeah, I mean, look, the Tonga and Samoa squads, yes. The Cook Islands again is another one. Yeah, I mean, look, we can have this debate all day long. We can look at it. We can look at um, Declan Rice and Grealish with Ireland and then switching to England at senior level, and the debate there, and we need to seriously consider looking at the selection rules and criteria. Look at half of Scotland's rugby union team, they're South African, for Christ's sake. Half their, like a third of their squad or something, South African. It is ridiculous. Um, and so, yeah, that question does have to be raised about selection rules. It's like South Africa produces so many rugby union players, they've got more than enough. So they start almost renting them out to other nations, really. It's quite ridiculous. And then we look at rugby league and rugby union as a whole, as just a code, just rugby league and rugby union, both codes. It's a mess. Um, so that in itself, I mean, Diego Costa, Brazil and Spain football. Um, but no, we do have to look at the criteria allowed for international selection, and I think we need to. I think multiple sports need to work together on this. Yeah, Wilfred Zaha. Yeah, that's another player that England have mishandled, I think. Um, but there's multiple players. I think we could discuss and look at in regards to the nationality changes, and Emerick Laporte's a good one. Um, Diego Costa is finished. Diego Costa. Um, he's a very divisive figure in Brazilian and Spanish football, let alone in the English club game. Very divisive in Spain, very divisive in Brazil, um, for those reasons. Obviously, he did play 3 games for Brazil, and then he switched his allegiance to Spain, and it's a very divisive. Uh, I wouldn't say abuse of the use of the international selection system. Um, I think he's an example we can use. The Declan Rice and Jack Grealish situations as well. Irish fans exploded, and not all English fans were happy with Rice and Grealish swapping from Ireland to England either. Um, and it does create a debate. Now, yeah, Di Stefano and Pushkash as well. I mean, that was well before any of us were born, but the debate's been going on since the 50s. The debate has been going on since the 1950s about player selection, and it's not going away. And that's got to be something that FIFA, World Rugby, the International Rugby League boards, World Cricket, the ICC, the IOC, when it comes to Olympic competition, the IIHF when it comes to ice hockey, because players have switched allegiance in ice hockey. We're eligible to play for 2 different countries, if not more. Um, Suddenly, we're having this debate about multiple sports, multiple sporting organisations, um, and the FIA with motorsport when the flag goes up and the national anthem is sung, played on the podium. No, I think this is a fair debate to have, and I don't think it is being had in the right way. So it starts really raising a lot of questions. And then you've got players like Diaz who are refusing to play for the country that they chose originally because they think they might get picked by a better country or a more successful country. What happens if he doesn't? The Dominican Republic are now questioning his loyalty to them at international level. Rightly so. Can we trust this player to put in 100% if we select him? But at the same time, um, you know, it means someone else gets to fill his place then. Fine, you don't want to play? We'll get this guy to play instead. So, yeah, there is that, you know, debate about it. But as a whole, I think this debate's been had for a very, very long time. And it is a very divisive opinion because of the globalisation of sport, the free movement of people, and, the modern world we live in. Has it devalued international sport somewhat? I mean, has it? Um, does it devalue competitions like State of Origin in rugby league in Australia? Does it devalue Lions tours, for example, when actually, let's say, the Lions are touring South Africa and a third of the players are actually South African? Does it devalue what represents your country wearing that jersey means? Did Pepe ever play? No, I don't think he did. Deco didn't play for Brazil either. Um, so Pepe and Deco never played for Brazil, but they were technically Brazilian. Um, But no, I think the debating point stands. I think it does create a very interesting debate. I don't think there's a perfect answer to it, um, but I think once you've selected a country to play for, that's the country you play for or represent. Um, and some players like Deco and Pepe have obviously gone down that route at senior level. I think they might have played at junior level. They might have played for Brazil. I can't remember. I think Deco did. But the Diego Costas and the Wilfred Zahas and the Jack Grealishes and the Declan Rices, they were, especially Declan Rice and Jack Grealish, that really created a debate both sides of the Irish Sea. And it wasn't always a particularly pleasant debate either. But the FIA, uh, which is the Football Association of Ireland, are basically bankrupt. They've got no money. They can't really afford to pay match fees and stuff. They've made some really poor financial decisions over many years that are coming home to hurt that organisation and the ability of the Irish FA to give a manager the best tools to pick the best team. And there are those players. I mean, Kevin Kilbane was an example of an English-born player with Irish parents who decided to represent Ireland. Yet he did play top level in England for many years. And he's gone the other way. John Aldridge is another one. English-born, Irish parents, played for Ireland. So there are some examples of players playing for lesser countries because of heritage. But no, this is quite a debate. I remember we were having a goalkeeping crisis in goal because there was a lot of injuries, and there was talk about calling up Manuel Almunia under residency rules because he had lived here long enough to play a game. Yeah, Klose and Podolski, Polish or one Polish parent, I think Miroslav Klose had or something, but they had Polish heritage, but they chose Germany, and I think the Germans are quite glad that both Podolski and Klose did. Quite honestly, they really benefited the German setup a decade and a half ago. Um, yeah, I mean there is that, but he decided because he obviously came over to Germany when he was very young, so he knows Germany as home. He doesn't know Poland as home. He was born and raised. Well, he wasn't born, but he was raised and brought up in Germany as a German citizen, regardless of his heritage. It's like Muzzy Izzet, for example, was born and raised in the UK, played for Turkey because his dad was Turkish, but he never lived in Turkey. And he was a very good player for Leicester City back in the day, and he played at the 2002 World Cup for Turkey. There are again, this debate's being had, and it's been had for many years. And there's a lot of players we could say that Podolski and Klose could have played for Poland, absolutely. Gonzalo Higuain. I mean, God, now we're talking about a really lump of a centre forward now. Um, I mean, Emerick Laporte plays for Spain, yet he's very French. Um, and that's a very grey area. And he couldn't decide whether he was Spanish, French, or Basque. It was hilarious. And in the end, he's hopeless, but and overrated. But that's another thing. Um, but no, in all seriousness, we're naming some relevant players right now who are still playing, and some players who played in our lifetimes who've only recently retired and gone into coaching or recently retired. Um, from the game. So yeah, we're having this debate now, and it's a debate, as I say, and this is just football. We've been talking about rugby league, rugby union, cricket. Kevin Peterson, for example, remember him playing for England? He was South African, very South African, so South African it was unreal. And the South African, I mean, he's not very well liked within the game anyway, but that's another thing. Um, the Curran brothers playing cricket for England right now, they're technically Zimbabwean because of their dad, although they were born and raised here. They could play for Zimbabwe should they wish. They've chosen to play for England, and fair enough. But we're not debating this so much in cricket. Jofra Archer, I think, is the only uh, player recently which has been a debate about who he should play for. Um, but the debate has been had for quite some time, and will continue to be had for quite some time. The FA trialling wearing body cameras. I mean, I think the FA has no choice at this time, especially with what happened with Mitrovic at the top level. Obviously, they want to have that ban extended. They're appealing the 8-game suspension he's been given. They want it to be longer. How much longer they can get it, I think, to Canio, Prutton levels of 10, 11 games, I think, around that ballpark. They're saying 8 games is not enough. It's most of the rest of the season. I think that's Fulham's best player. So it is hurting Fulham in their rundown of their season. But no, the FA, this has been long overdue. Um, this should have happened years ago. Um, the technology's been there for years. Use it, and it should come out the FA's pocket. It shouldn't be, these referees can't afford to use it. It needs to be used at all levels of the game, if at all possible. Because there are issues with referees really, not uh, not having a good time. I mean, I think this might, if they're fully mic'd up, this will cut down on dissent. But what is interesting, if a player abuses or verbally abuses, I mean, they're going to get booked anyway. That's going to be a booking anyway. Dissent is a bookable offence, and they don't do it enough. And if you can lip read, which most people can, it's very obvious what abuse the referees are receiving every single minute of every single game. The Prutton ban. I don't remember the Prutton incident, but I sort of vaguely remember 18 years ago a suspension being handed down to Prutton for an incident. I don't think it was as serious as the Di Canio incident in '98, and I do stress that. The Di Canio incident is the watershed moment in English football for what he did. The fact that we've now seen 2 further high-profile incidents, admittedly over a 25-year period, so this is not like it's happening regularly. They have been very well spaced out. I can see the FA's point of view with what precedent has been set in the past with the 2 previous suspensions. Whether they win their argument and their case when they appeal the decision is we'll wait and see. Fulham, no response from Fulham yet. I don't think they will contest any further change to the punishment. I don't think because there's no point. He's already suspended he's going to be suspended regardless. And if you break it down on how the referee gave his report at the time, and then what's been dished out, he might get a couple of extra games. But it's semantics at this point. But a lot of people are calling for a lengthier ban. So there you go. Yeah, Brentford might play in Europe next year. They might, yes. That is something that might happen. Mad that that may seem, It's likely, not unheard of, but it all depends, I think, on what Brighton do in the FA Cup. If Brighton win the FA Cup, that does change how the European qualification places work. It depends where Brighton finish as well. We were having this argument when Leicester won the FA Cup and Chelsea and Leicester were fighting for fourth place in that final Champions League spot. In the end, Leicester win the cup. Chelsea finished above them in the league. So it does ultimately depend on what Brentford do in, Brighton, do in the FA Cup semi-final and final. If Brighton go on to win the FA Cup, that does change who qualifies for Europe because it also depends where Brighton finish in the league as well. What teams do you think are getting relegated? Personally, I think it's going down to Bournemouth and Leicester. All three of them, in fact, all the clubs mentioned have changed manager. Southampton, Bournemouth, Leicester, and Leeds have all sacked their manager this season. And Southampton have gone through two managers this season. Very noticeable that the amount of managerial turnaround we've seen this season. 11 separate clubs have changed managers. Some clubs have changed manager more than once. So that creates a very interesting dynamic to the relegation fight. A lot does depend on what happens to Everton and what punishment they receive for their financial fair play breaches. If Everton are given a points deduction, it completely changes the makeup of the relegation fight. Villa have an outside chance of making Europe, yes. We were all saying like this club should go down, this club should survive, but West Ham and Bournemouth got wins at the weekend, and Leicester got a defeat, Palace got a win. It's very congested down there. There's not a lot of wiggle room for clubs, and as I say, the whole Everton situation can completely change the whole dynamic like that because they could get hit with a whacking points deduction or a very small points deduction. They might not get hit with a points deduction until next season. So when we're discussing who stays up, who goes down, that is a very open-ended conversation. No one club is safe from about 13th downwards. I would say maybe 12th downwards. Even Chelsea, where Chelsea are, honestly, no one is actually technically safe yet. So it's going to be a very interesting final month and a bit of the season. My concern about Everton's future, yes, I think any Everton fan should be concerned about where the club's heading. If they were to get relegated, they're done. They are going to be in free fall. I wouldn't think they would. They're looking like getting a transfer embargo and possibly a points deduction and a fine at this current time for their financial breaches. If they were to get relegated and have a transfer embargo placed upon them, they are stuffed. And then if they're hit with a points deduction, I think Sean Dyche is the right guy to have in the hot seat there. I think they put him in too late. And I think if they do get relegated, he's not there to start next season, which would be a travesty. At the same time, on the same token, their financial situation and with their financial breaches that they've been found guilty of, if they get relegated, they are in serious trouble. Serious. Richarlison at Everton. He was good for Brazil at the World Cup, and he wasn't playing. He was playing injured at the World Cup as well, which was something that needs to be noted. It's not worked at Spurs. You could argue that could be a Conte situation. You could argue the culture at Spurs is just a mess. A whole host of things. But it hasn't worked. I always say sometimes it's wrong club, wrong player, wrong club, wrong manager. Spurs, another trophyless season, and the pressure is mounting on Levy and the ownership group to allow the managers to do their thing and actually win silverware and actually build a philosophy that's a winning philosophy because they keep coming up short. And for those who are saying they want Pochettino back, there's a reason why he left the first time around. It's because the players stopped playing for him. Would I say Everton are the seventh club for history and for size of fan base? They've got a big fan base, very historical club, but this whole so-called Big Six is a media invention. It really is. Man City weren't part of the Big Six before they had money, so it's a complete media fallacy. There are some very big, well-supported clubs who aren't Big Six, and just look at my club history videos to look at the viewership figures on them to suggest that hey, there's 86 other clubs in the Football League, Premier League structure out of the 92, and some of those clubs have far bigger fan bases than I think the media pay attention to or realise. And I think a lot of fans get really, really pissed off with this whole Big Six sort of narrative that we are fed, or top four, or whatever the narrative is at the time, because it isn't the case. It's not the case. There's some clubs with big fan bases who aren't classed as Big Six, and Aston Villa, from my mind, is one of them. So it's a media narrative. It's a media invention. This phrase, Big Six, Big Four, the big guy. Leeds is like the 16th wealthiest club in the world, right? Let that sink in. Um, West Ham have got a big fan base, absolutely. Palace have got quite a sizable fan base for a club that's never won anything. Let that sink in. There's some. This is what really gets me. Um, is this obsession with this media obsession with the Big Six? What Big Six on what? Revenues, losses, debts, um, scandal. What Big Six in what? Arrogance, ignorance, corruption. Oh yeah, Burnley. I mean, it's the whole town and the dog. Last one out, turn the lights off. It's same with Blackburn. It's literally on some days when it's a big away day, like going to Wembley or whatever. It's the whole town and the dog. Last one out, turn the lights off. Um, Burnley could sell out Turf Moor multiple times. Blackburn could, in theory, sell out Ewood Park multiple times. Preston could sell out Deepdale multiple times. I think there is this false notion that only a handful of clubs have big fan bases. We're a population in the UK of nearly 70 million people. Um, and you look at the football club history videos that I've done, and go through that. You look at some of the viewership for some of those clubs outside the top flight. You'll be surprised how many fans they have. But I wouldn't say Bournemouth don't have a lot of fans. They just have a small stadium. Um, they've got a solid fan base. They've got a solid rivalry with Southampton. Their stadium isn't the biggest, but I think Fulham have a fair few fans. I think Fulham get underrated for the size of their fan base because of Chelsea, because of Brentford, because of QPR, all being in a very small area of West London. QPR's fan base, people forget the QPR there. I think again, London's a city of what 8-10 million people. I think the clubs get a fair distribution of fans to each club. I think people will be surprised by some fan bases being bigger than others, and then you've got to look at the global fan base as well, which is where I think this Big Six fallacy comes from that the media drivel give up. But no, Spurs haven't. Look, Spurs have had historically a lot of success, yes, but they've only won the league twice, and they haven't won a trophy for a very long time. And there are question marks about direction, the culture, and the philosophy of the club, which I think have to be noted. The fact that Mourinho and Conte, successful managers, have failed there. It tells you a lot about the club rather than the manager. Pochettino's won a little bit of silverware since he's left there. Again, tells you about the culture of the club. Yeah, but he's starting to get injury prone, and he's over the age of 30 now. So, does a club really want to have a player in the second half of his career who may have scored a lot of goals but gets injured a lot, and is, in my opinion, not as good as people think he is? I think he's overrated. I do. He scores a lot of penalties, but winning Golden Boot awards for yourself is not actually winning trophies as part of the team. It's fact. It's fact. Brighton have always had a big fan base. It's just the fortunes of the club because of bad ownership caused them to be in the situation they were. Man United could use him. It can't be any worse than Weghorst. I don't think Weghorst is the problem. Since they won the League Cup, they've lost every single game. So something's going on at Man United, which is troubling. I think Man United might slip out the top four, might slip out the European places. There's enough games left for them to fall back. Same with Spurs. Enough games for them to both fall back. And clubs like Brighton and Brentford, I'd say, and Newcastle have leapfrogged them as well. So I think Man United aren't in a good position right now. We could see, them just really they've run out of steam. I think. What club histories I want to do next? There's a few. There's a few more football league clubs. There's quite a few football league clubs to look at. Some non-league clubs who've been in the football league to look at. We've got Rochdale, Rotherham. We've got Barnet to look at. Dagenham and Redbridge. Some non-league clubs like Chesterfield to look at, and Yeovil Town. So there's a few. There's a few. There's a lot more European ones like Villarreal, Athletic Bilbao, Sevilla, Valencia, Deportivo La Coruña. Some of the French clubs like Saint Etienne and Lille and Olympique Marseille and Lyon. So there's a lot in Europe. Fortuna Düsseldorf, Hertha Berlin, 1860 Munich, Bayern Munich, obviously. All the Swiss clubs look fun to look at. Boston United, they're still going. Rushden and Diamonds, that's going to be fun. The rise and fall, I could title it like that. Rushden Diamonds, what happens to them? God, Rushden and Diamonds, I mean, they had the best kit. I would love to get my hands on a Rushden and Diamonds kit just for the fact it's a collector's item. Not because the team were any good, just collector's item. Quite literally. But there's a lot of club histories I could do. There's a few in Scotland, like Queen's Park, Queen of the South, Falkirk, Hibernian, Hearts, or Heart of Midlothian, Midlothian. But no, Boston United's going to be an interesting one because of their financial irregularities and how they got docked points and basically relegated themselves out of the Football League by being crooked. Dagenham and Redbridge is going to be fun. Crawley Town, Stevenage, probably known as Stevenage Borough. There's quite a few. It's going to be interesting having a look at. There's quite a few to look at. And over the Easter weekend, I think I will be doing some content there. Was it Dr. Martens who sponsored Rushden Diamonds? Dr. Martens sponsored West Ham at one point. Did they sponsor Rushden Diamonds as well? I'm going to have to look into that. But no, that's a fantastic club name, Rushden Diamonds, and of course the rise and fall and what happened and why they don't exist anymore is going to be really interesting to look at. But I could definitely do some content on Barnet and Dagenham and Redbridge because they're still obviously at Sutton United, Crawley Town, Stevenage. Let's have a look at some of the lower league clubs that not necessarily have been in the Football League a long time. That's going to be fun to look at. And then we'll look at some of the non-league clubs that have been Football League clubs, like Chesterfield, like Yeovil, for example. Do some content on them. So yeah, there's some content ideas. And then we can look at some of the European clubs in like Austria and Switzerland and Sweden and Spain and Portugal and France and Italy. There's some good clubs there to look at as well, who people may forget have actually won silverware. And you have to be of a certain age to remember they did win silverware. Like Hellas Verona won the Serie A Scudetto in 1986. Yep. Yeah, a team not called Inter, AC, Lazio, Roma, or Juventus won the Scudetto. It was called Hellas Verona in 1986. Madness. Napoli have not won as much as people think. Cagliari won the Scudetto once in 1970. Oh yeah, Hereford, Kidderminster, well, Hereford, Chester, and Scarborough have all reformed since they were in the Football League. So they're not actually the clubs that got relegated out the Football League. So they're new entities. So their club history is going to be completely different. Bradford Park Avenue is another one. You've got there's quite again. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun looking at some of the more obscure clubs or smaller clubs in the Football League and non-league. It's going to be fun. Um, Oh, Lille have won the French league more than once, by the way. That's not just a one-off. They've won it more than once. Um, I remember when Lyon had a record for winning, I think, four in a row. That had never been done before. They broke a record, and people were going, "Oh, Lyon are winning the French league all the time. It's making it uncompetitive," and they were, getting all worked up about Lyon winning their four league titles. Yeah, now PSG have ruined it, haven't they? But historically, the French league is very, very competitive. Historically, there's a lot of clubs that have won it. The Swiss league, ironically, is very competitive as well. Some really interesting league winners in Switzerland. So there's always something to look at when it comes to looking at the history of teams. Always, and some of the videos will age quite poorly when obviously um, trophies are won and lost. Yeah, Malaga are in a bit of a mess right now. That is true. They're really struggling at the moment. Not looking good there. Deportivo La Coruña are in a mess. They're in the third tier of Spanish football, I believe, going from where they were all those years ago, at the top of the Spanish table. Um, so there's again a lot of really interesting things to look at when it comes to club histories. And notice I'm not doing clubs like Rangers, Celtic, and Bayern Munich, and Barcelona and Real Madrid because I think they are more damaging for football than positive for football. And I look at the view counts for my club histories, and some of the so-called lesser clubs have higher view counts than some of the bigger clubs that I've done. So there is that. But no, the Malaga situation is very worrying, very very worrying. And so it's not just an English problem when clubs have financial issues and struggle, bad ownership. It's a Spanish thing as well. Look at Valencia over many many years. Valencia's been badly run for a very long time, and have got money problems. So this is not just an English issue. Yeah, West Ham have won loads. Check out the club history video. They won a lot. They've won the league though, but they've won a lot. They won a lot of domestic trophies, just never won the league title. But West Ham have won a fair bit of silverware. Um, I think not as successful as they could have been, and that's personal opinion. I think they could have been more. They could and should have been more successful than they actually have been. But they have won trophies, yes. But no, I'm going to leave that. Watford, no, I don't think they have. Watford have been to a couple of FA Cup finals, never won. Watford is a club I've got to do a club history on, by the way. Haven't done Watford yet. That'll be very, very interesting when I do the Watford club history. So I've got to look at the Premier League and the Football League and start going through the clubs and start looking at the clubs that I haven't done and doing some more club histories. Getafe, yeah, I mean, look, there's some clubs that get formed more in more recent times that do pretty well. Yeah, that is a thing. There's some clubs that have more recent foundations, yeah, especially in continental Europe, that rise to the top and have a reasonable run. But Villarreal has got to be the ultimate underdog story. Their first ever major trophy is a European trophy. Fantastic. And Villarreal is literally when they were playing away, it's last one out the town, turn the lights off. Yeah, were a top side, won a lot in the 50s. That was their era of being the top side in England was the 50s. They're also founders of the Football League, so they go back a very long way, and they've won. Seriously, check out the club histories. Just type in a brief history of, and the list of videos will come up. They're all in the football playlist, um, and there are some fantastic club histories in there. And Wolves have been a very successful side. So have West Brom. Werder Bremen used to win a lot as well. Yes, yes. You'll be surprised. You've got to be of a certain age to know about some club histories, though. Have to be of a certain age with some, but no, Wolves very good side historically. Werder Bremen, yes, used to be regularly in the Champions League, winning trophies domestically in Germany. Very good side historically, one of the most successful sides in Germany historically, actually. Um, Very big fan base in Germany as well. So yeah, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much, obviously, for all the questions. Really appreciate it. Big discussion about Hamburg. Yeah, did win the champion. Well, the old European Cup back in the day. Yes, they did. They're now in the second tier of German football. So let that sink in. They've not had a good time lately with where they are at in their league position. But yes, Hamburg have won the European Cup. That's correct. Anyway, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much, obviously, for all your questions. Really appreciate it. I'll have some more content uploaded for you very, very soon. But from me for now, it is goodbye.